The Cipher of the Ancients. Chapter 6. The True Recovery. The solitude of my office was a companion in itself, a silent, judging presence that seemed to mock my every thought. I sat at my desk, a mess of papers, maps, and half-empty bottles, the dim light from an oil lamp casting long shadows that danced across the walls like specters of regret. The room smelled of old books and stale whiskey, with an underlying scent of desperation that clung to everything, including me. Ella's absence was a void, an empty space where there once was laughter, strategy, and the warmth of shared purpose. My fingers, stained with ink in the memory of her brief touches, reached not for the map to our next clue but for the bottle. The amber liquid inside promised oblivion, a temporary escape from the reality where Ella was no longer by my side. I poured myself a glass, the sound of the liquor hitting the bottom like the toll of a bell for all the chances I hadn't taken, all the moments I'd let slip away. The weight of solitude wasn't just emotional, it was a physical force, pressing down on my shoulders, making each breath feel like a labor. The room was cluttered with the debris of our quest scrolls, artifacts, and the damned pieces of the ethereal apple. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight, a sound that echoed the groans of my resolve hardening. The only light in this darkness was my determination to find her, to see this through to the end. I knew I had to move, to keep going. I took another sip, the burn down my throat a stark reminder of every misstep, every moment I'd spent in the bottle rather than on the hunt. But as the warmth spread through me, so did a fire of purpose. I slammed the glass down, the sound a declaration of war against the magpie, against the very forces that had torn us apart. Despair washed over me like the stink of the rank. Where to even start? I had no leads, no questions to even ask, only the cursed presence of these damn apple pieces. The first piece wouldn't lead me blindly. The second could slow time, but the seconds already passed as hours knowing the magpie had Ella. And no brief glances of the future were working to help me see anything other than my body passed out on the floor. I tossed the glass against the wall, then emptied the bottle in one long drink. The world was starting to spin pleasantly. I wouldn't have to endure the torture of consciousness much longer. Spin, spin, spin? That's it! I exclaimed, rising too quickly to fall over my desk. Not caring, I finished my chain of thought. If I went with the spin of life, the cycles cruelly enforced by fate or the gods, I would end up in all the familiar locations following my familiar patterns. Patterns that led to contacts who might not know where the last slice of the apple resided, but I could get glimpses of the future to which outcomes might lead me closer with their interactions. I started out for my first contact, coincidentally in a tavern, because I needed another drink. The Gilded Grimoire, a real shithole, was the kind of place where the stench of desperation mixed with the stale beer and sweat of its patrons. It was tucked away in the underbelly of Arcania, a tavern where the light seemed afraid to enter, leaving everything cloaked in shadows that whispered secrets. This was where I'd find the goblin Slick, the weasel of an information broker who knew every dirty secret in this city. I stood outside, my hand clutching the third piece of the ethereal apple, feeling its power hum against my palm. Before stepping into that den of iniquity, I let the apple guide my vision, seeking out the threads of possible futures. Each scenario played out before me like scenes from a play I was directing. In one, Slick's smile was too wide, his eyes too bright, betraying me with a nod to some hidden thug. In another, I walked away with knowledge, the kind that could lead me to Ella. And in the worst, we ended in a standoff, with knives drawn and words like daggers. Armed with these visions, I pushed through the door, the bell above jangling like a warning. The air inside was thick, the kind of density you could almost chew on. Slick was in the back, his usual spot where he could keep an eye on everyone while sitting in the dark, his glowing red goblin eyes having no trouble seeing through it. His hair, the few strands left, was slicked back, his suit covered in the grease of his last meal, like he was trying to convince everyone he wasn't part of the filth he wallowed in. I approached, each step calculated, my senses heightened by the apple's magic. Before I got too close, I spotted him the thug Slick was planning to use to sell me out to the magpie. I veered slightly, my hand subtly moving, a spell whispered under my breath, neutralizing the brute before he could even think of making a move. He slumped in his chair, looking like he just decided to take a nap or imbibed one too many libations. Slick's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering as he realized I had outmaneuvered him. "Elradar," he greeted, his voice smooth but with an edge. "What brings you to my humble abode?" I sat across from him, the table between us littered with the detritus of past deals. "I need information," I said, my voice steady, the visions still fresh in my mind. "What do you know about the Grand Library?" His eyes flickered with interest, or perhaps greed, but I was ready. I watched the dance of this conversation into the near future even as we spoke. I watched the steps and flourished in my apple-guided visions. I would guide this talk, use his greed, his fear, to get what I needed. The Grand Library was my next stop, and with Slick's unwitting help, I'd discovered he had a contact who knew about Loretta, the closest thing to a clue I could find in this labyrinth of future conversations. "What's this contact's name?" I sweetly inquired. Slick sat back, knowing this was the end point in our conversation, where his greedy palm would be crossed with gold. "I'll tell you for." "Never mind," I said with a grin at his startled expression. "I'll figure it out," I said, abruptly standing and departing the stench. For I had no need to actually pay Slick, having already seen his answer through the apple. The next day at the Grand Library, Slick's half-orc janitor contact, RYCK, fell much the same way I rolled Slick. The ability to suss out the answers via the apple greatly sped up conversations and led to more profitable, well, at least less expensive, answers, being able to see the responses before actually paying for them. The contact had known Loretta, and where to search in the Grand Library for information. This led me to discover all the demigods involved in the apple had been brothers and sisters. The only one I'd found so far without a slice was Babail, ancient demigoddess of languages. Her ancient temple had been destroyed, but the building over its ruins was intriguing, and my next stop. My disguise spell was far from perfect, yet masquerading as a learned scholar to infiltrate the esteemed Arcania Guild of Linguistics demanded little more than a discreet bribe and an annual guild fee of a modest 20 gold coins. The spell wove a veneer of intellectualism around me, just enough to pass as a credible member. The guild's grandiose halls, filled with the aroma of aged parchment and the murmur of scholarly debates, seemed an impenetrable fortress of knowledge, yet the simplicity of my ruse allowed me to slip through its gates unnoticed. The biggest challenge of utilizing the first slice of the apple wasn't in its actual use, but in controlling its blue-white guiding light to avoid disturbing others or sparking their interest. By pairing the third slice with the first, I managed to track its path without lighting up the room, by seeing in advance where the light would lead via my mental intent before the disrupting light shone forth. I noted to myself I was definitely going to have to research how intent affected the world around me. The janitor's closet in the basement archive was hardly an obstacle to my thieves' tools. Designed more for keeping wandering scholars out of accidentally entering, rather than actually prohibiting theft. The apple's blue light highlighted the floor. Finding no trapdoor, I did what any other arcane trickster would do. Obliterated it with a spell. I did cast silence on the door to politely keep the other scholars' study uninterrupted. I'm a very polite half-elf. Mostly. Under the flooring was detritus filling in an ancient stairwell to the original temple's catacombs. Praying I would not encounter any more puzzle-loving immortal ancients, I dug out the stairwell and descended. How? Magic has its uses. The catacombs beneath Arcania were a labyrinth of darkness, the air thick with the dust of centuries and the cold whisper of the dead. The walls were lined with niches, each holding the bones of those long forgotten, their silent company stretching into the blackness. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen stones and the occasional relic of a past life, making each step a gamble. With the first slice of the ethereal apple in my hand, its blue glow was my only light in this underworld. It cast shadows that seemed to dance with the spirits, illuminating inscriptions that spoke of lore and loss, guiding me down paths that were mere whispers of passages. The piece didn't just light the way, it revealed the hidden, the secrets that lay beneath the surface of reality. As I navigated deeper, The apple's light highlighted a peculiar anomaly, a section of wall that seemed too smooth, too perfect amidst the decay. I pressed the brick the apple revealed, and with a low, grating sound, a hidden door revealed itself, the stones sliding aside to reveal a narrow, descending staircase. The air here was different, charged with an ancient magic, the promise of something significant. I descended until I entered a chamber unlike any I'd seen in the catacombs. This room was a sanctum, untouched by time, its walls adorned with frescoes depicting the tales of Babel, the demigod of language. The colors were still vivid, magically preserved, the figures almost alive in their depiction of knowledge and communication. The room was circular, its ceiling domed and painted with stars, as if to mimic the night sky, giving one the feeling of standing beneath an open sky rather than deep underground. Around and around the room flowed beautifully engraved scripts in hundreds, if not thousands, of languages. In the center, on a pedestal made of a translucent, crystal-like material, lay the final piece of the ethereal apple. The piece itself was identical to the others, its oft silver incandescent in the light of the first slice. As I picked it up, it began to glow a beautiful golden light, which merged with the glow from the first slice, creating a spectrum of hues that danced around the room, illuminating the ancient scripts engraved in the wall that seemed to shift and change, speaking to me in tongues I had never known yet now understood. I stood there, enveloped by silence, feeling a humbling awe that made my knees weak. My understanding felt like a mere speck, a single grain of sand against the vast, endless beach of creation. How many civilizations had risen and fallen, each with their own tapestry of culture, their own symphony of languages. The thought was staggering, a labyrinth of knowledge so deep and complex that it left the mind reeling, lost in the wonder of it all. I wished I could share that moment with Ella,